All right. What I have here is before we get into the details of my custom example, I just want to show kind of how to make a die line really simply out of existing artwork. So this is a vector artwork that I grabbed. I put into a 4-inch by 4-inch document as if it were some sort of holiday tag or hanger that you could hang on the wall or put on strings, etc. And essentially what we need to do is get our document to the point where we have two copies set up. One that is the artwork copy, and then one is basically a die line intended for cutting. One thing that I'll note with this example that I have, if you take a look at it, this is set up in CMYK. I would recommend that you always immediately convert your document color space to RGB because that's what the laser engraver is going to work in. So I'm going to go to File, Document, Color Mode, and set this up in RGB to start. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and make a copy of this layer. So I'm just selecting everything and I'm running an edit, copy, edit, paste. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste, and in my version of Illustrator, that creates one version on top of another. If not, if yours is offset, that's okay. You could align it after the fact. But basically, I have two versions now. So what I'm going to do is actually take one of these versions in my grouping, and I'm going to put this onto another layer with the intent that it's going to be a die line. So I'm going to make a second layer, and I'm going to call this die line layer. And I'm just going to go in and actually drag this content over to the die line layer. So now I have two separate layers. The top one being intended to be a die line and the bottom one intended to be the artwork. In fact, I could name it artwork. So with that selected, what I'm going to do is take just my top version and I'll select everything. So I just did a Command A, or I could have dragged around everything, but I'm going to get everything selected. And then I'm going to use the Pathfinder tool to unify the whole thing. And this is a great example of where Pathfinder can make your life really, really easy in Illustrator. So I'm going to go to Window Pathfinder, make sure I have that. And I'll just click the little Unite button and boom, I have an outline, which is going to be exactly what I want. So just to show you between the two, I've kind of got that on top of the pumpkin, which is beautiful because now I can use this big orange shape to essentially be a perfect die line. So what I'm going to do is with the background layer turned off, just to show you, I'm going to select the pumpkin that I have now. And right now it's set to have a fill on it of orange. I don't want that because the die cutter, as we have it set up in our lab, it doesn't care about fill or any of that stuff. All it cares about are colors that indicate different values. So I want this to only be a stroke. So what I'll do is turn off the fill, select the stroke, and I'm going to open that up. I'm going to double click on the stroke color so that I get the color picker. And what I have in here is RGB choices. I have hue, saturation, brightness. I have CMYK as well, but I'm going to pick from RGB. And what I want is true 255 red. If I select that, my stroke will turn 255 red, and that is the cutting stroke on our die cutter. That indicates cutting. Our cutter can also do engraving, where it will just sort of burn the surface a little bit and engrave it. Not really useful for paper, but for other projects, just to show you, if I put 255 blue in, oops, 255 blue, and 0 red. So blue is basically at pure 255. That would be the engraving setting for our laser cutter. I'm going to go back to 0, set this to a red 255, and there I have it. That's the first thing that you need to do. The next thing that you need to do is you also need to have a layer set, have your stroke set at a hairline setting or 0.25 point. So if I do that right here, I can see that I basically have my die line and then I have the artwork over the background. Only there is a problem here. My die line is dead on the edge of the artwork. Well, that doesn't work so well because you got to imagine that the laser is going to come along where my mouse is right now and try to cut that path. Well, if that's just a fraction tiny hair off, it's going to end up showing essentially paper white in this case. So it's much like a bleed when working with a publication, magazine, flat work, anything that you're cutting out, you got to count for having some bleed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that bleed manually by working with scaling the path and then maybe adjusting some of the anchor points on that path. So what I'll do is, just so I don't accidentally get it, I'm going to hit the little lock symbol. So now my background layer is locked. I can't accidentally grab it and move it around. And then I'm going to select this path of the outline and go in and start out by just taking that path, selecting it, and I'll scale it in just a little bit. So I've just scaled it in. One thing that can be really useful when doing this is to go in and turn on your rulers. So under Review, let's say Rulers, Show Rulers. And it's nice because right now I have 1/4 inch increments on the top here. So there's 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2. I know that half of that is about 1/8 of an inch. So if I really want to give myself some safety, I'll look at creating about 1/8 inch bleeds when I scale this. So I'm just going to scale this to center. And I'm going to go in on it kind of a bit, almost 1/8 of an inch, about there, with the idea that this is then going to cut in on my artwork. And while you're working on this, if you have a hard time with this, you can change the color while you're working on it. Otherwise, just turn it back at the end for reference. So what I'll do is go in, and since it's not a uniform scale, I'm going to use the direct select tool, or the white arrow, and that's going to allow me to kind of manipulate this die line a little bit. So I'm just going to pull it in so it looks a little bit more correct, like it's supposed to for the top of the pumpkin we have here. So some of these points where it's a little close to the edge, I may just pull it in and adjust it. And basically all I'd want to do is look all the way around that exterior of that pumpkin and make sure that I have a nice little overlap. So when the cutter comes through, it's going to cut and we'll have a clean edge on all that material. So I go through and kind of inspect the whole thing, which I'm doing right now. And this pumpkin looks pretty clean all the way around on all the edges. So this one would pretty much be ready to go, which is nice because I could send this and cut this. So the way that I would want to run this from this point is actually set it up for printing. So I'll move on to that video next.